This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello and welcome to the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, Meteorologist Brad Miller, and I would like to thank you for tuning into our podcast. Today, I have WeatherWorks Chief Meteorologist and long-range guru, Jim Sullivan, joining me, and we will be discussing the current Atlantic hurricane season. Not only will we talk about what has happened so far, but what can be expected going forward as we approach the peak of hurricane season in really just a few days. So let's get right to it and say hi to our own Chief Meteorologist here at WeatherWorks, Jim Sullivan. Welcome back, Jim. You've been on the show several times already.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, nice to be back. Hello to you too. And man, you're saying we're just approaching the peak of season. It already feels like we've had like a whole season's worth of activity.
Yeah,
we're only about halfway through climatologically.
Yeah, we've been busy here at WeatherWorks, that's for sure, with all the storms. And we'll kind of recap that here in a few minutes. Before we get to that, let's go over what the WeatherWorks early season tropics forecast was just a few months ago. How we've done so far. Has it verified? Anything's changed really since our preseason thoughts?
Yeah, so, the forecast ahead of time that we made in May, so the average number of storms per year is, 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. And our forecast heading into the season was leaning above average. We kind of went for 13 to 17 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and about 3 major hurricanes. So that was our forecast ahead of time heading into the season. And we did highlight, again, the Gulf Coast and potentially near the East Coast as being hot spots, maybe for some increased landfall risk. So unfortunately, it's coming in even on the more active side. We're kind of leaning active, but this is just going to be an active season. It already is. We're leaning towards a somewhat active season, not as active as last year, but with an increased landfall risk. Unfortunately, the landfall risk has already played out a few times, and unfortunately, the preseason numbers, they were already leaning high or above average, but they're going to probably be even more than that just because we're already well into working our way towards those ranges.
Right. All right. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about what to expect here the last 2.5 months of the hurricane season. Let's kind of recap though real fast. We've already had our fair share of tropical instances here in the Northeast, but we'll kind of go name by name here. We had Anna back in May, and typically we've had an early season storm really the last couple of years. Now, the one thing about Anna, it formed 10 days before the official start of the official hurricane season, but the one thing about Anna is that it formed in a location where no tropical storms within the month of May had ever been documented since 1950. So, it was, again, we've had these May storms, Jim. Anna was just, again, one of those storms that formed like way out there and, in an area that we've never seen a storm this early in the season.
Yeah, luckily it really didn't do anything to anyone. It kind of spun around. It was kind of close to Bermuda, gave them a little bit of breezy weather, but yeah, it was a little bit noteworthy for where it formed. 7th year in a row with a tropical or subtropical storm forming before the official start date of the season on June 1st. So continuing the trend, although again, a lot of those storms that form early are smaller, weaker, and luckily Anna kind of kept that up.
All right, and then we had Tropical Storm Bill, really no impact here in the Northeast. It kind of spun around off the coast of North Carolina, then it went out to sea. There was Claudette, that was in the southern Gulf of Mexico in mid-June. Did make landfall in southeastern Louisiana, but the winds were just barely over tropical storm force, mainly just a localized flooding issue there with Claudette. Then we had Danny, that was down in the southeast also, off the coast of South Carolina near Hilton Head. Once again, this was more of a rain event. Winds were 45 miles per hour, not really a big issue for folks down there. And then we moved on to Elsa, and we're going to discuss Elsa a little bit because it was the earliest to become a hurricane so far east in the MDR. And, and that's also what we call the main development region in the Atlantic, and that goes all the way back to 1933. It was a Cape Verde storm, Jim. Let's talk a little bit about Elsa because this was one of those long track hurricanes very early in the season.
Yeah, it was very noteworthy. Honestly, total impacts from Elsa weren't anything, all that unusual for a tropical impact, here, from Florida up the East Coast. But what was noteworthy was, like you mentioned, how far east it formed in the open Atlantic. Cape Verde storms, as you kind of touched on, those are storms that come off Africa. They move by the Cape Verde or Cabo Verde islands and then can develop into tropical storms or hurricanes. That's where they get their names. And those are the long track ones that can go all the way across the basin. And those usually happen more August or September, kind of near the peak of the season. That's when those Cape Verde storms are most favored to occur. This one formed in late June, so that was quite unusual.
Yeah, so, Elsa, it made landfall in the Big Bend of Florida on July 7th, and it kind of straddled the East Coast all the way up to New England. A lot of flooding was witnessed with that one. Connecticut, Massachusetts saw the brunt of the rain for New England. Is mainly, the path kind of crossed right through there. Now, it made a second landfall in Westerly, Rhode Island. And we're going to talk more about Westerly, Rhode Island here in a few minutes because kind of a odd issue there with where Elsa made that second landfall at. So we'll move on, though, to Fred. Now, we actually had a big break because July 7th was Elsa making landfall in the Big Bend of Florida. And then we really didn't have anything. We were nameless through really the rest of July. Even into the start of August, we had a long break with no tropical activity. And then Tropical Storm Fred came along on August the 11th. That made landfall along the Gulf Coast, and then it moved northward towards the Ohio Valley and eventually impacted Northeast and New England once again with some tornadoes and some flooding rain.
Right. And I would say, and that break was well deserved. It was one of the quietest Julys we've had in years. So that was a nice change of pace that we actually had a break. But then Fred was really the first storm of many to start impacting us in the Northeast, like you mentioned. It did bring some flooding rain and some tornadoes. And in particular, there were some tornadoes. They occurred late at night in southeastern Pennsylvania, just, in some of the Philly suburbs. And then there were a couple of more that occurred up in North Jersey. And these tornadoes occurred like middle of the night. And then there was some flooding rain like in the Hartford to Boston area that next morning.
And really the track of Fred is why we had the severe weather with the tornadoes and flooding here in the Northeast. It like I said, it made landfall in the Gulf. And then it came north into the Ohio Valley, then went east. So as it got pushed east, though, a good portion of the I-95 corridor, really from Hartford south, was on that northeast quadrant of the storm. And although it was already land, it made landfall, it still had a lot of twist to it, if you will. And that's what kind of led to some of these tornadoes and the flooding rainfall, because anytime you're on that northeast side of the center of the storm, again, even though it's weakened, that's where you're going to get the highest threat for any kind of tornadoes and some of that southerly, flow of air and very moist air into the Northeast. So, that was why we had that issue with the tornadoes and flooding. I kind of remember working that morning too. At 3 a.m., we were doing heads ups for, tornadoes, like I said, in North Jersey, down towards like the Philly area and even along the Jersey Shore. So it was an active morning, and that rain just, again, caused some flooding for a good portion of southern New England and the Northeast. So, once we move on from there, we had Hurricane Grace, and that was a decently strong storm. It made landfall twice down in the Gulf, once as a Cat 1 on the Yucatan Peninsula, and then it made second landfall as a Cat 3 hurricane near Veracruz, Mexico. Once again, no impacts here in the Northeast, but that just kind of worked its way from east to west and just kind of fell apart then once it hit the high mountains of Mexico. But lots of flooding, landslides, unfortunately, for a good portion of southeastern parts of Mexico. Then, of course, Jim, we move on to Hurricane Henri. And this one also was a very high impact event for us here in the Northeast and New England.
Yeah, it was. And, honestly, the wind with Henri ended up, the wind impacts weren't quite as bad as they could have been, partially because it ended up making landfall a little bit farther east than what it looked like a couple days ahead of time. A couple days out, it looked like it might kind of go across Long Island and directly into Connecticut. Instead, it made landfall in Rhode Island. So that took like Long Island and the Hartford area out of what would have been some worse wind impacts. But there was a lot of rain with Henri, both both in New England where landfall occurred, and then also west of the storm, well west of the storm, like eastern Pennsylvania into New Jersey, we had some flooding rain. And you can argue that the worst of the flooding actually occurred in Pennsylvania and Jersey, even though the landfall was all the way over in Rhode Island.
Right. And I think a lot of that had to do with the topography of, the winds around that low pressure area, still the remnants of Henri. It just kind of wrung it out over, like you said,
right,
northeastern Pennsylvania. And I'm out there towards the Poconos. We picked up about 5 to 6 inches of rain that night. We had some flooding issues as well. It came in like different parts with that storm, because I remember the day before that is when New York City got hit pretty good. And then later that night into the next day was South Jersey. And then, the following night, I think it was that Sunday night, was when we got it into portions of Pennsylvania into northern New Jersey, where we had the flooding rainfall. And then the next day we had some severe weather to deal with as it finally pushed itself eastward, across Connecticut. And it was just a storm to remember. Now, let's talk about this, Jim. The models. Now, granted, as meteorologists, we do use the models. We try to, use that as guidance. And the tough part about forecasting Henri was the eventual strength. And really, it kind of dictated how far west and east landfall was going to be. I mean, we saw landfall possibilities from New York City all the way to Boston almost. So talk to us about, the strength of the storm and how that really drove the eventual track of Henri, because this came up a lot.
It was a very difficult evolution, because what happened was you had Henri itself kind of moving, north off the East Coast, and you had an upper level low pressure sitting over the Mid-Atlantic. It was sitting kind of between like Pennsylvania and Virginia, that area. And what ultimately happened was that upper level low pressure, not only did it influence the track, but without that upper level low pressure there, I don't think we get nearly as much rain in Pennsylvania and Jersey as we did. So that influenced the rain, but it also influenced the track, because eventually that upper level low pressure in the counterclockwise circulation around it caught Henri, and Henri, it moved north into Rhode Island, but then it hooked west towards the Hudson Valley. So when and where that west turn was going to occur was very important, because there was some thought a couple days ahead of time that it would occur earlier. And instead of like going north to Rhode Island and then turning west, the thought was it might turn west earlier and move more directly across Long Island in Connecticut. And that didn't quite happen. It took a little bit longer to catch it. And part of the reason it took longer to catch it was Henri didn't get quite as strong as some of the forecast models wanted it to. It had about a day of favorable conditions over the Gulf Stream. It made landfall early Sunday morning, and, Friday night through Saturday night, it had a window of favorable conditions, but there was shear early on in the storm's lifetime. So it only had about a 24-hour window to potentially organize and intensify, and it spent most of that time just organizing. So it briefly made it up to low-end hurricane intensity. There was some thought that maybe it would be a little stronger, maybe it would peak at a Category 2, and a stronger storm, I think, would have gotten caught a little bit quicker and gotten flung a little bit farther
west, right?
Just because it was an upper level low pressure, so a stronger storm would have interacted with the upper level. If you're getting my drift, low pressure a little bit more,
right? Well, yeah. The one thing to explain to everyone too, the stronger the storm, the higher up in the atmosphere it goes.
Right.
So it is going to get steered, if you will, by more of the upper level components of the atmosphere versus like maybe a weak tropical storm that, it's not very strong and it's kind of getting driven more by the lower levels of the atmosphere. And again, that's kind of the easiest way to describe it. Stronger storms are more, they're going to get turned a little bit easier based on, whatever's happening in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Same reason when you have a big storm, maybe off the East Coast, you have a cold front coming through. Usually that trough is strong enough just to kick it east, and it could be a Category 3 or 4 hurricane because, again, it's very healthy and it's so far up in the atmosphere that it's able to be steered by the upper level westerlies, if you will, as they kind of kick in. One thing of note, though, also with Henri was, again, we'll go back to westerly Rhode Island. It was kind of a double whammy for this city or town, if you will, down there in southern Rhode Island. Tropical Storm Elsa made landfall on July 9th, 12:15 p.m. Tropical Storm Henri made landfall on August 22nd at 12:15 p.m. So a month and a half later, the same exact, two different paths too. It was like a crisscross for that area.
Yeah, and Henri was pretty impactful in that area. I know I know I mentioned earlier the wind impacts could have been worse than they were. There was wind with Henri. Like southern Rhode Island had fairly widespread tree damage and power outages. So it was, a fairly formidable storm in that area where it hit.
Right. And it was just that the rain was just so long to go through southern New England. I mean, it took almost 48 hours between landfall, then moving west and finally moving back east to finally clear the area. So that's why rain kind of took the cake there with that storm. But yes, there was some wind damage, obviously, down there in, southeastern New England. So that moves us on then, of course, to Ida. That's the next storm. And, this was just a devastating storm for Louisiana, southeastern Louisiana. I think they're just finally starting to get power back to most of the city of New Orleans. There's still people missing, unfortunately, down there. It was just a devastating Category 4 hurricane, almost Category 5. Maybe after when they do the review at the end of the year, it could get bumped up. But either way, it was splitting hairs, Category 4, Category 5. It was just an amazing hurricane there for southeastern Louisiana. Yeah, for sure. And oh boy, it has been a rough couple of seasons for Louisiana. It kind of reminds me of what Florida went through in 2004, 2005. They had a number of significant hurricane hits. And now Louisiana, last year they had Laura near Lake Charles, was it Delta near Lake Charles? They had Sally near New Orleans, Zeta near New Orleans. I'm getting all my Louisiana hurricanes mixed up. And then this year, Ida near New Orleans is a strong Category 4. So they've had some very significant hits, and I think Ida might have been the worst of them overall in Louisiana. And I think just on the Louisiana landfall, they're probably going to retire Ida. Probably won't be another hurricane named Ida. And that was just the Louisiana impacts, which were very, very severe. But then it had more impacts here in the Northeast, unfortunately. Yeah, the remnants of the storm, they winded down like, all hurricanes and tropical systems do as they, get over land. But at the same time, it interacted with a pretty strong trough here in the east. And also that helped to, get the rainfall again to a really, really heavy extent. And, we saw the results here across the I-95 corridor, really from Boston all the way down to Washington, D.C. We had lots of flooding instances. We had tornadoes across southern parts of New Jersey. We had some large tornadoes, actually, something you just don't see. In New Jersey, we had a wedge tornado. EF3, yes. EF3 tornado, which I think is the last time there was an EF or back then an F3 in Jersey. I think it was 1990, so it's been 31 years. Yeah, and of course, then the big story. Granted, the tornadoes are just as devastating, but that's more of a smaller area. Right. The flooding, of course, is going to go down in history across New York City, and we saw the results. As we saw 3 to 5 inch per hour rain amounts from some of these slow moving bands of rain that moved through New York City last week. And it was just, there's still, unfortunately, over 50 people died here in the Northeast, and there's still some people missing. It's just something that is unprecedented. It was forecasted, but, it just hit so fast that a lot of folks weren't able to react. And again, it's just the water had no place to go in these urbanized areas. Yeah, unfortunately, the damage and like you said, the death toll are staggering. It's really, it's hard to, think in 2021 of 50 people dying from a weather event in the Northeast, and it was from flooding, like you said. Unfortunately, this is going to be kind of the benchmark flood for a lot of areas from Southeast PA and Philly across the central Jersey area into Northeast Jersey, New York City, even like the New York City metro, like the White Plains area, kind of the benchmark flooding event in that area. And it was every type of flooding. Like, you have your street flooding, and then that goes into your streams and creeks, and then eventually your rivers, everything flooded. And in most areas impacted in that corridor, it was some of the worst flooding, if not the worst flooding ever, or, in generations. So
yeah, like you said, kind of, unprecedented, devastating, really severe impacts.
Yeah, and social media just, it was like, was it last Wednesday night into Thursday? I mean, every tweet that was out there from the Northeast and Facebook posts and, even here at our WeatherWorks social media, it was just the tornadoes, or you can see the flooding videos. And even some of our staff here at WeatherWorks were affected by the flooding too. So, I mean, it wasn't like it was like, oh, wow, look at the flooding here and, we're okay. But, we had staff members that had gotten flooded out of their homes, and some of their cars got impacted as well. So, I mean, it was, it was something that impacted a lot of folks here, really in the New Jersey and New York. And like I said, even all the way down towards the mid-Atlantic. So it was unprecedented, but hopefully we don't see any more of that here in the Northeast. But we know that the peak of hurricane season is just coming up here upon us. Next couple of storms, not too much going on. Tropical Storm Julian, that was basically out to sea in the Atlantic. Hurricane Kate kind of peaked also in the Southeast Atlantic, but it was out to sea. No impacts really anywhere. Hurricane Larry, as of September 7th, is still kind of spinning around southeast of Bermuda. It is a Category 3 hurricane, but it's expected to stay to the east of Bermuda and really not have any impacts anywhere other than some large swells here along the East Coast. So no direct impacts, just going to see some big waves if you're going out to the shore here over the next couple of days. And again, it should stay east of Bermuda, even really not have much impact there. Our next name on the list is Mindy. So we'll have to see where Mindy formed. I'm sure we'll get to the M storm because the peak of hurricane season here in just a few days, Jim, on September the 10th.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, it's kind of a question of what does the second half of the season bring? After a very, the first half, it ended up being very active, although it was up and down. It was a kind of an active start in June, then dead, basically grinded to a halt there for a full month. And then it's been very active ever since then. And luckily, it's still kind of active right now with Larry spinning out there as a strong hurricane. But like you said, that's finally a storm that's just kind of curving out to sea, which is where we like to see them go.
And then, it's just amazing that, here we are again, just a few days still before the peak hurricane season. And here in the Northeast, we've been impacted by 4 storms. All a different nature, whether it was the flooding, again, not so much the wind like we talked about, Henri was the real only big windy impact, but it's just been a lot of severe weather and the flooding here in the Northeast. So, all right, well, we'll take a quick break here with the rest of the podcast here. We're, again, talking about the tropics, Atlantic hurricane season 2021. We'll have more on Jim's thoughts as we go on through the rest of the season when we come back.
Heads up, it's time to renew your subscription for certified snowfall totals. Don't get left behind with unreliable information. Get the facts with WeatherWorks. We take pride in the accuracy of our post-storm snow and ice totals, and will always provide you with the weather details that matter most. Don't wait for the first winter storm. Renew now and get ahead of the pack. Visit CertifiedSnowfallTotals.com today or call us at 908-850-8600.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Chief Meteorologist here at WeatherWorks, Jim Sullivan, still joining me on the podcast here in the Weather Lounge. And Jim, now we're going to talk more about what's going to happen now going forward. So we have Larry spinning around out in the Atlantic. Again, not going to be an issue. Mindy's our next named storm. And let's talk about this. What do you think we get to on the name list here? How far down? Just a shot in the dark here.
Yeah, let's see. So we're already at 12 named storms, right? That's L. God, I have to imagine we have at least another 8 or so in the tank. So I agree. I think we probably get to 20 or so named storms, which that would put us awfully close to the end of the alphabet. Well, would that get us to W or pretty close? Because we skip a few letters.
Yeah, we do.
So I think we'll be pretty far down the list again. A side note, this year we won't go to Greek letters if we run out of names. There's just a kind of permanent auxiliary list of names now if we exhaust them. So I don't know if we get past the W storm again this year, but I think it'll be close.
Yeah, and it's like you said, the peak of hurricane season, September 10th, September 11th, right in that time frame. So, yeah, we've got a long way to go, and we're probably due for a couple of more strong storms, hopefully not anywhere near land. Hopefully they stay out in the Atlantic, but we know there's going to be a few more storms, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, because that's where things really start to get going as we get into September and even in October. I mean, some of these storms, I think we had Wilma, like you said, back in 2004, I think it was. I mean, that was
05. Yep.
Yeah, 05 down in the Caribbean, and that of course that's where the warmest water is, and still shear is pretty low at this time of the year, and even into that late in the season. One thing of note though, also before we get to more of the forecast, I don't know if you noticed the ocean, the heat content, and what it's left, and how much upwelling there was with Hurricane Ida, just from a week or two ago.
Yeah, I was just looking at that a little bit ago, and yeah, what Brad's referring to is like the Western Caribbean and most of the Gulf of Mexico were very warm. Like normally that's some of the warmest water in the Atlantic in any given year, but even warmer than normal. So very warm waters there. But yeah, after Ida went through, the water temperatures in that area, they're actually now kind of close to or even slightly cooler than normal. Now, grand scheme of things, that doesn't mean a whole lot. Those are still some of the warmest waters in the basin. There's still water temperatures in the mid 80s instead of like the upper 80s like they were. So still plenty warm enough to support activity, but a nice little cold wake there where Ida went.
Yeah, you could see the path clearly, but like you said, it's not going to last long. I mean, the water's warm. It's still early September. I mean, it's still going to kind of cook down there for another month or two, and it'll kind of fix itself, if you will, going forward. So there'll be plenty of fuel, unfortunately, if things do get active down there in the Gulf of Mexico. But, as we do push into October, it's more of a Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico. However, still the Atlantic seaboard has to watch, in the eastern seaboard, because we do get some late season storms, obviously, with Sandy. And, it's not out of the realm of possibility. We got something like that this year, but it's probably not going to happen, but hopefully it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
but
it's like through I would say September, those Cape Verde storms that we talked about earlier, like with Elsa being an unusually early Cape Verde storm, through September, you can get storms that form out in the open Atlantic, like Larry did more recently. So we do still have a few weeks left of that kind of season. And then, yeah, as Brad touched on, October and November, if there is stronger activity, it usually comes out of the Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico, because those waters stay a little bit warmer longer, and that's an area in the fall where it just generally is wetter, and maybe some weaker wind shear. So yeah, it's so definitely various areas to watch here over the next couple of months.
Right. Then it just comes down to the overall pattern, the upper air pattern. And, you would need, as we get deeper into September, especially in October here in the Northeast, we get more and more cold fronts, more troughs start coming through. So it kind of still protects us up here to a point. However, if you do get more of a ridgy pattern, like what happened with Sandy, when you had a big high over New England, it's almost like a slow moving nor'easter. It pushes the storm one way or the other. In that case, it was just, something that wouldn't allow Sandy to go back out to sea and had to push it west-northwest. So, again, it's usually more of a trophy pattern that we get into late in the season and kind of protects the East Coast. But, we'll have to watch it, because if we do get into a big ridgy pattern, then it opens the door still for more eastern seaboard activity.
Yeah, and to touch on that a little bit, just kind of talking about the large scale pattern, for a lot of the summer, we did kind of have that ridgier pattern here. Like the trough was over the central United States. So like places like Texas, Louisiana, for the most part, did not have a very hot summer, because that's where the dip in the jet stream was. And that dip in the jet stream kind of helped pick up some storms and direct them towards the Gulf Coast. And then on the other hand, it was ridgier. There was a ridge in the jet stream for a lot of the summer, especially kind of starting in July, centered over New England and Southeast Canada. So that really helped direct Henri towards the coast, as opposed to letting it go out to sea. Now, recently that's changed. After Ida went through, we finally got a dip in the jet stream, or a trough, behind a nice cold front on the East Coast. So that is what's pushing Larry out to sea. see. And it's what gave us that nice, very nice, less humid weather over Labor Day weekend. So that trough's there for now. There are signs that after the middle of September, so starting, within a couple weeks, that will kind of go back to the pattern that we saw for most of the summer, where the trough is more over the central United States with more ridging kind of across Canada into the Northeast. So I do think the pattern is going to briefly, at least temporarily, for at least a few weeks, shift back to one that might unfortunately draw more storms towards the Gulf Coast, might draw another storm or two
up the East
towards
Coast.
the East Coast. So yeah, unfortunately, I as busy as it's been already, it is much too early, just based on where we are in the season, only about halfway through, and the upcoming pattern. It's definitely way too early to write off future impacts, unfortunately.
Right, absolutely, because if we do get into that pattern, like you said, if we do get a trough Midwest, and that allows for more of a south to north flow of air, if you will, and it pulls everything northward, versus like a trough that's set up over the East Coast and kind of deflects everything. Really, what's going to happen again, like you said with Larry with the first front, and then we have another strong cold front coming through really Wednesday into Thursday, and that will actually be the final kick if kind of shove Larry even further out into the Atlantic. So think about it this way: if the ridging was there this week and we didn't have these cold fronts coming through, then who knows? Maybe Larry could make a run at the East Coast, but confidence is very high that there's no impact here on the East Coast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no chance outside of some swells. No impacts here to the East Coast, which, again, I think everyone needs a break after Ida. So we're getting that, and then. Yeah, so it's kind of a question of, unfortunately, the steering pattern is looking concerning the last couple weeks of September into October, and then I think later October into November. By then it's getting quite late in the season, and there should be enough troughiness over the eastern United States, I think, by late October into November to shun everything well to our south and well to our east. But yeah, there is another window coming up later this month into October where the steering pattern is concerning for future landfalls somewhere along the U.S. coast.
All right, then as we get into November, then we start turning our attention to winter, Jim. You'll be back on here with Mike.
Forbidden word. No winter. No.
You'll be back on with Mike here in a few weeks for a winter outlook. But so yeah, lastly, any changes? Do you think from your early season thoughts? I mean, is there anything that has kind of pushed you one way or the other now that we've already gone through this part of the season? And I mean, we've already said that maybe the pattern could favor a little bit more of activity here along the East Coast. But what about like where else could be a hot spot?
Yeah, definitely worried still about the Gulf Coast, especially from Louisiana points east. It's hard once you get past mid-September or so to get a storm to hit Texas. It's not impossible, but it's harder. They tend to just go a little farther east after that, at least the big ones. But yeah, the Gulf Coast, also Central America, the Caribbean, those are common hot spots late in the season, which, again, it didn't get as much attention as the U.S. landfalls last year, but Central America had two devastating impacts back-to-back in November from hurricanes. I believe it was Iota and another one of the Greek letters. That's the problem with the Greek letters. They all run together. But there were two very impactful landfalls in Central America last November. So that's an area to watch for. And then, yeah, early or like heading into the season, the thought was that there would be active periods and quiet periods, kind of depending on the MJO, as you touched on, because it looked like the MJO would kind of, at times move through phases.
Right. We have 8 different phases there. Yeah.
An active pattern. And then at other times it would move into the phases that support a quieter pattern. And that's what we saw. We were kind of in the active phases in June. We were also in the active phases the second half of August. And it was very active in both of those windows, but it was quiet in between. And we're kind of getting a bit of a lull right now with just Larry spinning around out to sea. So I think that pattern still holds where, it's kind of coming in. Last year, the faucet was on the entire season. That's how we got 30 storms. This year, it's more in spurts, but when it's on, it's active. And the MJO does look like it might might kind of be in a bit more of a down phase here through the second or third week of September, the next couple weeks. After that, it does look like the MJO, or just kind of in general, where the tropical forcing is. And what I mean by tropical forcing is where our thunderstorms kind of favored across the tropics. Where is their upward motion across the tropics? It's an important thing, to the pattern, both in the summer and winter. But that tropical forcing looks like maybe late September into October, it'll line up again for another active period. So I would say between the pattern kind of directing storms towards the Western Atlantic, so anywhere from the Caribbean up to the United States, plus the MJO looking a little more active, that would be the time frame to watch. Late September through at least the first half of October might be our next active window with landfall risks.
Right. It kind of looks that way too. I mean, even though we have Larry out there, and just because we're at the peak of hurricane season doesn't mean there has to be 5 storms in the Atlantic. I mean, there's been years where there's only been 1 or 2, like maybe this year, and then you have a peak again later in September, early October, like Jim was talking about. So just because we're at peak and we have only 1 named storm has no bearing on the rest of the season, because we could easily get into a very active period once again, and a pattern that may support something that would impact us here in the Northeast. So basically, Jim's saying don't let your guard down. Maybe the next week or two after Larry is kind of quiet. I don't even think the National Hurricane Center is watching anything at the moment on the radar.
Yeah, I think I think they're watching a little area of low pressure
in the Gulf.
That might spin up into a weak system off the Carolinas later this week, but that doesn't look like it's going to really be anything impactful.
Yeah. So, I mean, it probably won't even get a name. So, Mindy could be something maybe a couple of weeks away, but yeah, for sure. It's going to be something to watch here as we go on through the rest of September, and especially in October. And then hopefully things really start to die down. But hopefully we're done with any kind of tropics impact here in the Northeast, Jim. But I have a weird feeling we're not. So we'll have to maybe see how things go.
Yeah, it seems like the paths have kind of been drawn. And unfortunately, it's the Gulf Coast and then kind of the East Coast. And it's... just kind of underscores how a lot of our tropical impacts here in the Northeast, it's not the tropical storm itself. It's that interaction with the jet stream that the storms get as they work up here. That was a big part of Ida. It contributed with Henri as well. So even if they aren't hitting us, if they're hitting the Gulf Coast and we're getting the moisture, it might just mean more rain, unfortunately.
Yep, you get that trough to react with the remnants of a storm like we saw with Ida, then, it could be another repeat of flooding, but hopefully not. But I want to thank you again, Jim, for joining us here in the Weather Lounge. Anything to add here?
No. We're working on the winter forecast. Our clients are going to get our second winter preview here within the next week or so. So an exciting time for us here at WeatherWorks as we look forward to an active season for us and a lot of our clients is winter. Although, of course, this has been a very active summer, relatively speaking, as well. So, no, we're working on the winter forecast. And always nice to take a half hour or so to lounge with you guys, if you will.
Yeah, we appreciate it, as always. And, again, we're looking forward to hopefully a quieter time here in the Northeast. We could use a break also before we get into winter, but, we know how fast weather can change. But, usually September, October, even into November, early November is more of a just cold frontal passages here in the Northeast. So we'll just have to keep an eye on things. So that'll do it for today's podcast. Thanks again for dropping by the Weather Lounge. And don't forget to check us out on all of our other social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And our next podcast will air on September 22nd. Until then, have a great couple of weeks, everyone, and stay safe.